Hi, I'm Nina from Witty Cakes and I'm so excited to be joining you here again at Witty Cakes. Today we're going to be talking about the essential tools for making sugar flowers. We've got lots and lots of tools. I know it looks complicated, but it's not, especially if you're making wired flowers. The only thing that you need is to be prepared before you start, and that's it. You can do anything. So first of all, you need flower paste, not fondant. Most flowers you can do with fondant, but not the professional, really thin, really delicate flowers. You need flower paste. It doesn't have to be this particular brand. You could use basically any other brand. That has to be either florist paste, flower paste, or gum paste, because in other countries they call it gum paste. I use Squire's Kitchen flower paste. Sometimes I use satinized gum paste. It's a good one. You could use basically any other brand, but it has to be specially made for flowers, because that's what will give you the really thin petals and leaves. So we're starting with that. The other thing that you need to have is a good working board. Like this work board is quite good, the green one. It comes in other colours. I believe it comes in white as well. And you could, nowadays they make lots of different ones. They do the self-healing one, which is good. I tried the self-healing one. It's not too bad. I prefer this one because it doesn't scratch too much when you move your cutters on it. So the workboard, the flower paste. If you're making wired sugar flowers, then you'll definitely need one of those. This is called a groove board, and it kind of gives you that raised bit here, which will allow you to insert the wires into. So this is essential, and it will also have these little holes, which we call Mexican hats. And it's very useful to make sort of small flowers and buds. So that's very important if you're making wired sugar flowers. There are other alternatives to the groove board. One of them, they do make a groove rolling pin, which is like basically like the normal rolling pin, but it has sort of a groove in the middle. So when you roll it out, it will give you that raised bit in your flower paste. And that brings us to the rolling pin. You'll need a rolling pin basically. So a small one is always better for the flowers to make sugar flowers. You will also need these two, and you could get them from any hardware store. You will probably have them around the house. So we've got a wire cutter here, and these are needle nose pliers, which you use to shape your wires and hook them for making a vase for the sugar flower. You will also need a pair of scissors, and these are very, very important. They come in handy when shaping petals and making sort of texture, as you will see in my other tutorials. You will need a ball tool, which kind of thins the edges of your petals, and it makes a massive difference. I've seen lots of sugar flowers where the petals look kind of thick and unnatural because they haven't been thinned. So a ball tool is really good. I'm using a metal one. You could use a plastic one. You could even use a small rolling pin instead to thin the edges. It works just as well. There's also this Dresden tool, which looks like a small spoon. It has a kind of a flat edge, and on the other side it's a veining tool where it can like leave impressions on your paste if you want to make sort of like veins or something. You will need a paintbrush, which is kind of this size, 1/2 inch long, 1/4 inch wide, and it's really good for sticking petals together. For sticking petals, you will either need water. Sometimes I use water for specific flowers, and most of the time I use edible glue. Any brand will be fine. Some brands are different to the others. Some of them are kind of loose, like this one, and the others are slightly thicker. So it's up to you what you prefer, as long as you use, obviously, the correct quantity, not too much and not too little. You will also need a foam pad, like this one. I love the white one. There are different foam pads. This one is just the right thickness, just the right give, because some of them are really tough. They kind of break the flower, and the others are too soft. This one is just perfect for me, and I'm not sure what the brand is, but it's in white. It's the only one that comes in white, and you can find it at any like cake decorating shop. This is another piece of equipment that is really handy. This is kind of like a sleeve. I got it from Wilton. So when you cut your petals or leaves or anything with your paste, you kind of put it here and you cover it, and it keeps it fresh. It's called a Stay Fresh mat, and it keeps it fresh, keeps it from drying while you're working on one of the petals. You can cut a few of them and leave them under here. It will make sure that your petals don't dry. Don't overfill it though, because when you overfill it with petals, it kind of leaves that edge, kind of bringing the air in and drying them over time. But yeah, it's really, really handy, really useful. One of the other things that I use, which is like essential, are the flower cutters. So you could either get the plastic ones, so these are plastic cutters, or the metal ones. Surprisingly, the metal ones are kind of have a better cut. They leave no marks when you press on them. They're really good. They give you a clean cut. But my problem is when you press on them too much, you kind of hurt your hands. So if you're making loads of flowers, they might not be the best thing to use. Or you could get like some people sell like an acrylic piece of like a small acrylic square that you can put on top of it and wriggle it to protect your hands. So just bear in mind that if you're using metal cutters for many sugar flowers, just bear in mind that it does hurt. The plastic cutters, these are my favorite. So these are just rose petal cutters, and they're really, really useful for so many different projects. I use them obviously to make roses. You can use them upside that way. It looks like a rose petal. That way it looks like a teardrop. So they're really useful, really handy for so many different decorations and so many different flowers as well. That's the 5-petal cutter, and that's handy as well for making different flowers. I use it to make roses sometimes, quick roses. I use it to make gardenia flower. So there are many different uses to it as well. Stamens are also very handy. Instead of making these by hand, some people make them by hand using paste and wires, but they come ready-made and they come in different colors and different sizes. I like the one-ended stamens because they're easier to work with, but you can get the double-ended ones as well, and they give you more of them, so this works out fine. You will also need florist tape. Florist tape is quite easy to use as long as you know how to use it. You basically just cut a piece, pull to activate the glue on it, and use it to kind of combine the wires together or stick the wires together. Which brings us to the wires. These are one of the things. So I get so many questions regarding wires. What wires do I use? What color? What gauge? How thick? How small? Things like that. So I don't exclusively use PME wires. There are so many different brands. It's fine. You can get whatever you're happy with, as long as it's not too cheap, because sometimes the cheaper ones do tend to have tearing on them. The paper covered ones. Sometimes the paper tears off. So this one is 22 gauge. This is 24 gauge. This is 20 gauge, and that's 18 gauge. And these 4 gauges are what I use most. I use the 18 gauge for the flower center because it's the heaviest. As you can notice, the smaller the number, the thicker the wire will be. So the 18 gauge one is really good for holding heavy flowers, really good for holding the bud. 20 gauge is really good for making actual buds. Not a full flower, but it's good for holding an actual bud. 24 is what I use most of the time to make petals and leaves. When I make flower petals, I use white. Please remember this, don't ask me how I know, but the green one does tend to show, and it doesn't look very pretty if you use it on petals, especially light coloured petals. The white is good for petals, the green is good for making leaves because it tends to blend and it looks nicer. So the 22 gauge one is really useful for making smaller buds and smaller kind of flowers where you don't want your wires to be too thick. So that, I hope that covers everything wire related. Now we come to the colors. So I use gel colors to color my paste. Most of the time, 99% of the time, I use Sugar Flare gel colors or paste colors. I use the spectral ones. This is Cornish Cream and it's a really nice shade. There are so many different shades, so many different colors, and they're all really good. So that's what I recommend, but you could use any other brand, obviously, as long as it's gel color. You don't want to use the liquid colors because they do tend to affect the consistency of the paste. So that's what I use to color the actual paste. You will still need dusts. When you're finished with the flower, you can use petal dusts, and that kind of brings the flower to life. They're really good, not in these particular colors, obviously it's just an example, but it brings the flower to life. They're really useful. When you're finished dusting the flowers, you might need to steam them to kind of set the dust. You can steam your flowers using either a normal kettle or just basically using a steamer. A travel steamer will do. What I also use are a bit of Chex or vegetable fat or Crisco, whatever you call it in your country. And it's really good for kind of moisturizing the paste, kind of softening the paste before you start. It's good to put on your hand before you start. It kind of protects your hand from the color, protects your hands from sticking to the paste. It's really good, really useful. I wouldn't be without it. And this is just corn flour, and I've got a piece of muslin cloth, and I kind of put the cornstarch inside it, and I tied it together, and I put it in this sort of container, and it's really useful because it gives me just enough cornstarch to work on. Wilton does sell pouches for cornstarch if you want to just buy another, just buy a pouch instead of making your own, but it works out quite well. You will also need cocktail sticks. They're really useful for maybe shaping flowers and rolling the edge of flowers on them. They come in really handy as well. And the last and final tip that I heard over and over, which is really good and it's really useful, to always keep a piece of fondant handy to kind of clean your hand with it before you start. And you know, this dreadful lint that comes into your paste, this kind of makes sure that your hands are clean before you start. You just keep cleaning your hand with it and just fold it and put it in a small plastic bag to keep it from drying. It's really useful. The last thing that you'll need are flower shapers or petal shapers, and these are just apple trays that I got from the supermarket for free. Just try and ask for permission before taking them, because it might look a bit weird just emptying the apples and trying to take the tray. People might look at you funny, but just ask for permission, say that you need some of these for your flowers, and they most of the time they're really helpful, and they do bring you some of them from their like storage. You will also need these bumpy foams. You can get them from like eBay or Amazon. They're readily available from any mattress shop, anywhere you can find them. They're really handy to dry leaves and petals on them, smaller flowers, maybe to blossoms to take that shape. They're really good. Basically, these are all the tools that I use most of the time. If you want to learn more about making the actual flowers, we've got many tutorials available, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.